time reveals the bitter truth. Great wealth, accumulated through decades of ruthless ambition, can vanish in a single generation's careless hands. Industrial palaces now stand empty or transformed into museums, housing only the ghosts of former glory. Billions squandered on vanity, on islands constructed from hubris, on the fleeting pleasures of those who never learned the value of what they so easily spent. Some fortunes disappeared through spectacular mismanagement, others through the strange nobility of philanthropy. Wealth returned to the world from which it was extracted. Inheritance, that great promise of perpetual prosperity, became instead a hollow legacy. These are stories of empires crumbling, not from external conquest but from within. Cautionary tales of how the mightiest financial dynasties can fade into obscurity, leaving behind nothing but faded photographs and the whispered warning that even the greatest fortunes cannot purchase immortality. Imagine you are a multi-billionaire tycoon in the twilight of your life, standing before the vast empire you've built from the ground up. As you decide where to leave your fortune, you look into the eyes of your heirs, trying to discern who among them you trust enough to handle your life's work. Indeed, it would be a moment of profound introspection and decision-making, echoing the choices faced by industrial robber barons of the past. And one such magnate, Henry Clay Frick, confronted this very dilemma. His legacy, however, took a turn that many might not anticipate. In the cutthroat world of the steel industry, Frick's business practices earned him infamy. Yet, perhaps as a counterbalance to his ruthless pursuits, he also became known for his lavish spending on art and cultural artifacts. Turning their backs on the race to accumulate more wealth, the Frick children found their callings as scientists, professors, and artists, quietly choosing to let the mighty $3 billion Frick family fortune dwindle away, setting the name apart from old money families whose wealth seems to grow by the minute, like the Rockefellers and Mellons. In today's episode, we dive into the lessons learned from the Frick family fortune, the complexities of inheritance, and the nuances of old money as we describe the Frick family, when a $3 billion inheritance is given away. Henry Clay Frick, that titan of American industry and a maestro in the art of making bank, didn't just climb the ladder of the Industrial Revolution. He practically built a new one, planting himself firmly as the world's second richest man at his peak. And his wealth, painstakingly forged in the fires of the coke and steel industries, didn't just surpass the fortunes of mere mortals. It even outshone that of his mentor and partner in industrial alchemy, Andrew Carnegie. But Frick was no one-trick pony. His shrewd business sense, tireless dedication, and knack for spotting golden opportunities in coke and steel turned his ventures into the Midas touch of the era. H.C. Frick & Company wasn't just another player in the game, it was the game, fueling the furnaces of steel magnates like Carnegie himself. By joining forces with Carnegie in 1882, Frick entered the steel industry's major league and became its MVP, riding the wave of America's steel-fueled ascendancy. But let's not box Frick into the all-work and no-play category. The man had a flair for the finer things in life, a veritable connoisseur of the arts with a taste as refined as the finest aged wine. His New York City mansion was a temple to luxury, and a Beaux-Arts masterpiece that shouted opulence from every limestone block. Built between 1912 and 1914, this Fifth Avenue fortress was more than a dwelling. It was a vessel for Frick's monumental art collection, destined to become the Frick Collection Museum. And the mansion's interiors? Think of them as the velvet glove on the iron fist of industry, with 16 rooms that were less rooms and more sanctuaries for the soul. This was a home built not just to live in, but to exhibit a collection that would make any art lover weep with joy. The so-called living hall alone, virtually unchanged for over 76 years, is an icon of Frick's enduring vision of grandeur and grace. And what of the art? Frick didn't just collect paintings. He collected masterpieces from Rembrandt's enigmatic The Polish Rider to Goya's dynamic The Forge. His collection was a roll call of art history's VIPs, Bellini, Vermeer, Gainsborough, El Greco, each piece a badge of honor, each brushstroke a narrative of Frick's journey from steel magnate to patron saint of the arts. Today, the Frick collection stands not just as a museum, but as a cathedral to creativity, housing over 1,500 pieces that span centuries of European art. Thus, when Frick took his final bow in 1919, he didn't just leave behind a pile of cash. He left a treasure trove so immense it's hard to wrap your head around it. Imagine a fortune so vast that today it would be worth billions, a sum so eye-watering it underscores the monumental empire he built, brick by coke-fired brick. Clocking in at an estimated $145 million at his earthly departure, think a cool $2.9 billion today, Frick's fortune was the stuff of legends. Therefore, from humble origins to towering over the American Industrial Revolution, Frick's story wasn't just about making money, it was about making history. However, making the money for yourself is one thing, teaching your children, and then their children, requires an entirely different skill set. In order to learn exactly what happened to the mighty Frick fortune, let's roll back the gold-encrusted timepiece and start our journey in the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania. Yet, as the story unfolded, it led to a pivotal moment that would shock both admirers and critics alike. In the early settlements of Pennsylvania, where opportunity beckoned the bold, the forebears of Henry Clay Frick made their mark. Originating from Swiss and German stock, these pioneers embodied the spirit of those seeking a fresh start in the New World. And their endeavors, primarily rooted in agriculture, contributed to the development of western Pennsylvania, setting a stage far removed from the future industrial exploits of their descendant. Indeed, John W. Frick, Henry's father, was no stranger to this agricultural life, but harbored ambitions that stretched beyond the confines of farm work. Born into a modest farming environment, John was a man who saw value in education and the promise of innovation, despite the family's financial limitations. And Elizabeth Overholt Frick, Henry's mother, brought to the family a legacy of industry from the Overholts, a family known in their locality for their work ethic and for making a mark in the distilling business. Elizabeth's influence imbued the family with a resilience and a strong sense of community, foundational values in the small town of West Overton, Pennsylvania, where Henry was born. Thus, the upbringing of Henry Clay Frick reflected these principles of hard work and community service. Born on the 19th of December 1849, as the eldest of 6 children, Henry's early life was framed by the simplicity of rural America, an existence marked by the labor of farming and the tight-knit community ties. And his education, starting in the local schools, revealed an early inclination towards business and a particular talent for numbers. Despite showing promise and a hunger for knowledge, financial pressures led to a pragmatic shift in Frick's path. Leaving Otterbein College to return home at 16, he began working as a clerk in a Pittsburgh mercantile firm, a decision dictated more by necessity than choice. This period of work outside the academic sphere offered Frick practical insights into the business world, an unplanned but invaluable continuation of his education. And these clerkship years were more than a stepping stone. They were a transformative period that allowed Frick to internalize the mechanics of business and the intricacies of the market. Therefore, this era in his life was instrumental in shaping his approach to business, fostering a meticulousness in financial matters and a strategic vision that could pinpoint and exploit nascent opportunities with precision. By 19, he had launched into his first venture into entrepreneurship, investing in a coke production operation. This bold move signaled the onset of an expansive business empire, and Frick's unyielding determination and keen business insight would soon propel him from the modest beginnings of rural Pennsylvania to towering heights in the industrial landscape. Henry Clay Frick's entry into the coke and steel sectors was a pivotal move that not only surged his wealth, but also solidified his position in American industrial history. And his strategic ventures in these industries were characterized by shrewd decisions and alliances, propelling him to a leading role in the Industrial Revolution. You see, the inception of Frick's journey into the coke business in the 1870s showcased his ability to identify and capitalize on emerging market trends. Coke, a critical fuel derived from coal for steel production, was growing in demand as the steel industry began to boom. Consequently, starting with a modest investment in a small coke operation, Frick's keen market insight and entrepreneurial spirit led to the rapid expansion of his enterprise, H.C. Frick and Company. And his efforts soon positioned him as the country's leading coke producer. Now, a defining moment in Frick's career was his partnership with Andrew Carnegie during the 1880s. Carnegie, a major figure in the steel industry, recognized the importance of having a stable coke supply for his mills. This partnership between Carnegie's steel manufacturing capabilities and Frick's coke production expertise was a powerful combination, enabling them to dominate the steel and coke markets. And Frick's role evolved significantly when he became chairman of Carnegie Brothers and Company in 1889, further tightening the integration between coke production and steel manufacturing. Now, this collaboration with Carnegie was crucial for Frick's financial success. As the steel industry flourished, driven by the expansion of railroads and the urbanization of America, Frick's wealth skyrocketed. His dominance over the coke supply chain provided him with a strategic edge and a lucrative slice of the industry's profits. Frick's influence extended further, with his contribution to the creation of the United States Steel Corporation in 1901. This amalgamation of steel and iron firms, including Carnegie Steel, into the world's first billion-dollar corporation, signaled a new chapter in industrial history. By the dawn of the 20th century, Frick had become one of the nation's richest individuals. His ventures into coke and steel, coupled with his alliance with Carnegie, yielded substantial returns, enabling him to diversify into real estate and finance. However, Frick's legacy is not without its controversies. His vehement stance against labor unions and his pivotal role in the Homestead Strike of 1892 underscore a darker aspect of his legacy. This confrontation at the Homestead Steel Works, which Frick managed on behalf of Andrew Carnegie, became one of the most notorious labor disputes in American history. And the decision to bring in private security agents from the Pinkerton Detective Agency to break the strike led to a violent clash, resulting in numerous fatalities and a wave of national condemnation. The incident not only spotlighted the harsh realities of labor conditions during the era, but also the extreme measures industrial magnates would employ to quash unionization efforts and maintain control over their workforce. Despite the shadow cast by such events, the impact of Henry Clay Frick on the industrial landscape of America is undeniable. His strategies, though often criticized for their ruthlessness, played a pivotal role in establishing a vast industrial empire. His legacy, though complex and controversial, underscores the multifaceted nature of industrial expansion and its far-reaching effects on American society and economy. However, his impact on his own children and descendants would be even more direct, which is what we'll investigate in the next chapter. Henry Clay Frick, indeed, left a legacy that extends far beyond his business achievements. Upon his passing in 1919, the division of his substantial estate revealed a clear preference for his daughter, Helen Clay Frick, who inherited the majority of his wealth. This decision highlighted her distinctive role within the Frick family and paved the way for her future endeavors in philanthropy and the arts, in sharp contrast to her siblings, who received significantly less. Now, many say Helen's inheritance was a deliberate recognition of her shared interests with her father, particularly in the realm of art. Entrusted with a considerable portion of his fortune, including his esteemed art collection and his New York residence, later transformed into the renowned Frick Collection Museum. This bequest appears to be a clear indication of Frick's trust in Helen's ability to further his cultural and philanthropic aspirations. However, the financial discrepancy in the inheritance was notable. Helen's share amounted to approximately $38 million, equivalent to over $400 million in today's currency, positioning her among the wealthiest women in America during that period. On the other hand, Frick's son, Charles Frick, received a lesser portion of the estate. Though still a considerable amount, it paled in comparison to what Helen received. Yet, nevertheless, Childs established his own legacy as a noted vertebrate paleontologist, contributing extensively to the American Museum of Natural History. Yet the repercussions of Frick's decision have had a lasting effect on his lineage. Helen's inheritance not only allowed her to enhance the Frick legacy through her philanthropic and cultural contributions, but also set a precedent for the subsequent generations. And her efforts laid the groundwork for her nephew, Henry Clay Frick II, and other descendants to pursue diverse interests and careers. Notably, Henry Clay Frick II became a distinguished physician and professor instead of a ruthless businessman like his grandfather, serving as chairman of the Department of Medicine at New York Hospital, Cornell Medical Center. Thus, his career, though distinct from the industrial and artistic spheres of his grandfather and aunt, was facilitated by the financial stability afforded by the Frick fortune, showcasing the varied paths Frick's descendants have taken, each shaped by the inheritance and the legacy left behind. However, it is certainly clear that the multi-billionaire lifestyle that Frick himself lived would not be the path of his later descendants, due in part to his personal dispensations of wealth. In order to better understand how that played, and compare it to other old money families who kept and even increased their wealth, such as the Rockefellers and Mellons, let's jump to the next chapter. Now, Henry Clay Frick's approach to amassing and allocating his fortune was characterized by a pronounced emphasis on culture and philanthropy. His lavish expenditures, epitomized by his opulent New York City residence, now the esteemed Frick Collection Museum, and his vast art collection, underscored his profound appreciation for cultural and historical patrimony. And while these investments endowed his legacy with a rich cultural dimension, they did not enhance the financial inheritance bequeathed to his descendants in a direct manner. In a marked contrast, contemporaries such as the Rockefellers and Mellons opted for a diversified investment strategy, channeling their fortunes into ventures that assured enduring generational wealth. The Rockefellers, for example, significantly engaged in philanthropic endeavors through the establishment of perpetual entities like the Rockefeller Foundation. This strategy not only advanced public health initiatives, but also secured and augmented the family's wealth. Likewise, the Mellons' savvy investments across finance and industry sectors guaranteed a wealth expansion that benefited successive generations. The execution of Frick's estate further highlights the contrast in financial legacy management between his family and those of the Rockefellers or Mellons. Frick allocated a substantial portion of his estate to philanthropic causes, with the majority of his residual wealth inherited by his daughter, Helen Clay Frick. Though laudable, this philanthropic gesture did not facilitate wealth growth over time. Helen, inheriting a considerable fortune, prioritized arts and charity over investment strategies that could have furthered the family's financial base. And Frick's choice to bequeath the bulk of his estate to a singular heir, rather than distributing it among multiple descendants, concentrated the wealth but simultaneously curtailed its growth potential. Conversely, the Rockefellers and Mellons established trusts and foundations, mechanisms that not only safeguarded their wealth but enabled its financial proliferation across generations. Therefore, today, Henry Clay Frick's descendants, though comfortably affluent, do not figure among the echelons of modern billionaires. This status is the result of a series of factors deeply embedded in the family's ethos and historical decisions. And the Frick family's inclination towards privacy, coupled with an enduring commitment to philanthropy, has significantly influenced their financial standing and societal perception. Additionally, the Fricks have steered clear of venturing into large-scale business enterprises or adopting investment strategies aimed at significantly multiplying their wealth in today's economic climate. While they have managed their assets with competence, their approach has not been marked by the aggressive pursuit of capital growth, a strategy often employed by contemporary wealthy individuals and families to amass substantial fortunes. Picture yourself standing before an architectural marvel on New York's Riverside Drive, where a palace worthy of European royalty once commanded the Manhattan skyline. This was no ordinary mansion, but rather a testament to one man's audacious dream, a 75-room Renaissance chateau that cost an astronomical $7 million in 1906, equivalent to over $200 million today. And this architectural triumph, with its gold-leafed ceilings, private art gallery, and three-story pipe organ, stood as a monument to America's first age of excess. This was Riverside, the home of Charles M. Schwab, a man whose rise from mill worker to steel titan embodied the American dream. In the glittering realm of America's Gilded Age, where titans like Carnegie and Morgan reigned supreme, Schwab carved his own empire with theatrical flair. As the first president of U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation, he commanded an annual salary of $100,000 and a bonus of $1 million. Yet beneath the shimmer of success lay a tale of dramatic decline. He spent money like water, hosting lavish parties with champagne flowing, maintaining a fleet of yachts, and building palatial residences that could rival European aristocrats. His appetite for opulence stretched from his summer estate in Loretto, Pennsylvania, to grand philanthropic gestures that seemed more theatrical productions than charity. In today's episode, we'll explore the remarkable rise and tragic fall of Charles M. Schwab, from Pennsylvania's steel mills to a legacy lost, as the excesses of a gilded life faded into mere memories. He seemingly had it all, a fortune that would make today's billionaires raise their perfectly manicured eyebrows. Indeed, at his family's peak, Charles M. Schwab sat atop a staggering $40 billion empire in modern money, a sum that plants him firmly among America's Gilded Age titans. But it's how he flaunted it that would truly capture the attention. For example, his piece de resistance was the absolutely magnificent Riverside mansion in Manhattan. A $200 million, in today's currency, icon of excess, this architectural marvel commandeers an entire city block on Riverside Drive. We're talking 75 rooms of pure French chateau opulence, complete with a Gothic chapel that would make Notre Dame blush and marble staircases that practically demand a grand entrance. The Palm Court accommodated 300 of society's finest, and the original Rodins graced the corridors like common decorations, while priceless European masterpieces adorn walls as casually as family photos. Furthermore, the ballroom, dripping in gold leaf and crystal, served as the stage where America's industrial royalty performs their social dance. But that's merely the city residence. Let's hop over to Immergrün, his summer sanctuary in Loretto, Pennsylvania. This 44-room countryside palace sprawled across 400 acres of what can only be described as botanical perfection. Indoor swimming pool, naturally, private theatre, but of course, bowling alley. Would you expect anything less? The man maintained a collection of properties that would make a real estate mogul weep. Hunting lodges in New Jersey, coastal retreats, urban investments that read like a Monopoly champion's portfolio. His yacht, Loretto, demanded $300,000 annually just for upkeep. That's the price of some people's homes, mind you. Yet beneath this cathedral of consumption lied a surprisingly generous heart. Loretto transformed under his patronage. Schools rose, churches appeared, infrastructure materialized. His charitable gifts matched his personal indulgences, dollar for dollar, funding everything from public libraries to technical schools, particularly in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Thus, it is heartbreaking to see the downfall of such an iconic man, who also happened to grow up with humble immigrant roots, as we'll see in the next chapter. In the shadow of Pennsylvania's Allegheny Mountains, where coal dust and Catholic crosses dotted the landscape in equal measure, the American story of Charles M. Schwab began not with grandeur, but with the quiet determination of German immigrants. His father, John Anthony Schwab, had crossed an ocean carrying little more than hope and calloused hands. The elder Schwab would marry Pauline Farabor, herself born to German-American stock, their union blessed in 1862 with a son who would one day command industrial empires. The family's move to Loretto, Pennsylvania, proved pivotal. It was a town where faith and commerce intertwined, where St. Francis College's spires pierced the mountain mist, and where John Anthony's modest wool and cotton business provided just enough, but only just enough. The young Charles, or Charlie, as townsfolk called him, absorbed lessons that no business school could teach. The weight of a dollar, the value of a handshake, the unwritten code of mountain communities where a man's word carried more currency than the contents of his wallet. In Loretto's Catholic schools, young Charlie's extraordinary gifts began to surface. His memory, described by teachers as near photographic, allowed him to recite entire passages of text after a single reading. But it was his peculiar alchemy of charm and capability that set him apart. Whether calculating complex sums in his head or organizing school events, Charlie Schwab possessed that rare ability to make everyone in his orbit feel like the most important person in the room. At 12, while other boys played at games, Charlie drove stakes for surveying teams, earning $1.50 daily, real money in mountain country. Later, behind the counter of Loretto's grocery store, he displayed an almost theatrical talent for commerce. Customers would watch, mesmerized, as he totaled complex orders in his head, all while engaging in the kind of warm banter that made them forget they were conducting business at all. His mother, Pauline, recognizing something extraordinary in her son, nurtured his gift for music alongside his mathematical prowess. Young Charlie's fingers, equally adept at piano keys and profit calculations, suggested a versatility that would later serve him well in both boardrooms and ballrooms. These seemingly disparate talents, artistic sensitivity and mathematical precision, would eventually combine to create something unprecedented in American industry. A businessman who could both master the minutiae of steel production and inspire thousands with the force of his personality. Yet as young Charlie stood on the cusp of manhood, destiny was preparing an encounter that would transform this promising mountain boy into an industrial legend. In the smoky streets of Pittsburgh, Andrew Carnegie, the nation's foremost steel baron, was about to meet a young man whose extraordinary combination of charm, ability, and ambition would reshape not just one industry, but the very nature of American business itself. In the smoke-filled world of Pittsburgh's steel mills, Charles Schwab's trajectory defied the established order of things. The young man who had once driven stakes in Loretto's mountain soil found himself driving ambition into the very heart of American industry. Carnegie Steel, that great crucible of industrial might, became his proving ground, and Andrew Carnegie himself, the diminutive Scotsman who controlled America's steel destiny, became his mentor. The transformation from manual laborer to engineering assistant took just 6 months, a promotion so swift it left whispers in its wake. But those who worked alongside young Schwab understood. Here was a man who could calculate complex metallurgical formulas in his head while simultaneously charming hardened mill workers and Eastern financiers alike. Carnegie, watching from his fortress-like offices, recognized something of himself in this young man who seemed to master every challenge with almost theatrical ease. By age 24, Schwab commanded Carnegie's Homestead Works, the crown jewel of the steel empire. Workers twice his age took orders from this wunderkind, who remembered not just their names, but their children's birthdays. At 35, he ascended to the presidency of Carnegie Steel, the youngest man ever to reach such heights. His methods differed dramatically from the iron-fisted approach of his contemporaries. Where others ruled through fear, Schwab led through an almost magnetic personal force, pioneering profit-sharing programs that transformed workers into stakeholders. The creation of U.S. Steel in 1901 revealed Schwab's true genius. In smoke-filled rooms where industrial titans plotted the future of American manufacturing, Schwab orchestrated a merger of unprecedented scale. The numbers were staggering. $492 million, America's first billion-dollar corporation. His personal stake, $28 million in stock, represented more wealth than most men could imagine. But for Schwab, this was merely a prelude. The acquisition of Bethlehem Steel in 1904 marked his masterpiece. The struggling company, under Schwab's guidance, became a laboratory for industrial innovation. His gamble on the Bethlehem H-beam, a revolutionary design that would literally reshape America's skylines, demonstrated both technological vision and commercial courage. Every major construction project of the era, from the George Washington Bridge's massive spans to the Chrysler Building's gleaming spire, bore the stamp of Bethlehem Steel. During World War I, when America's industrial might became crucial to Allied victory, Schwab's organizational genius reached its apex. President Wilson himself called upon him to accelerate shipbuilding efforts. The results were spectacular. American shipyards, under Schwab's direction, produced vessels at rates that seemed to defy physical possibility. His empire expanded beyond steel into mining, manufacturing, and real estate. Financial titans like J.P. Morgan counted him as an equal. Political leaders sought his counsel. He moved through the highest circles of global power with the same ease he had once shown in Loretto's grocery store. Yet at the very peak of his success, as Bethlehem Steel's furnaces roared and his personal fortune seemed limitless, destiny was preparing a cruel reversal. In the glittering New York of the 1920s, while jazz bands played and champagne flowed, the first tremors of Charles Schwab's downfall were already rumbling beneath the surface of his seemingly impregnable empire. The market speculation that had once seemed to turn everything he touched to gold began to betray him, each loss driving him to chase ever riskier ventures. Even before Black Tuesday cast its shadow across America, the man who had risen from the Pennsylvania mountains was discovering that financial gravity spares no one, not even industrial titans. The Great Depression struck with the force of a blast furnace explosion. Bethlehem Steel's stock certificates, once worth $200 per share and proudly displayed in oak-paneled boardrooms, now traded for less than the price of a workman's lunch. The numbers told a story of almost mythological destruction, billions in value vanishing like morning mist, personal guarantees on company loans becoming millstones around their guarantor's neck. Each day's financial pages wrote another chapter in the dismantling of a legend. The Riverside Mansion, that monument to Gilded Age excess that had hosted princes and presidents, stood as a silent witness to its owner's reversal of fortune. Unable to meet even basic property taxes, Schwab watched as his greatest symbol of success slipped through his fingers. The estate's foreclosure proceedings drew crowds of onlookers, some perhaps remembering nights when they had danced beneath its crystal chandeliers. His beloved yacht, once the toast of Monte Carlo, was sold for a fraction of its worth. The art collection that had made critics swoon was dispersed to satisfy creditors. The transformation was brutal in its totality. The man who had once calculated complex steel production figures in his head now struggled to balance his checkbook. From his new home, a modest apartment that would once have housed one of his middle managers, he borrowed money from increasingly reluctant friends. His famous smile, once capable of charming millions from the most hardened bankers, grew strained, then rare, then vanished altogether. Health failed as fortune fled. The robust figure who had strode through mill yards, memorizing workers' names and personal stories, became stooped, hesitant. His legendary optimism, which had helped build skyscrapers and launch ships, finally buckled under the accumulated weight of disaster. Even Bethlehem Steel, the company he had transformed from a struggling operation into an industrial colossus, slipped from his grasp, though its furnaces continued to burn. When death came in 1939, it found Charles Schwab in circumstances that would have seemed impossible during his glory days. The final accounting showed debts of $340,000, a number that would have seemed like pocket change to the man who had once commanded the equivalent of billions. The obituaries struggled to reconcile the industrial genius who had shaped America's skyline with the broken figure who had died practically penniless. But perhaps the most profound irony lay in what remained of the Schwab legacy. Here was a man who had revolutionized building construction, whose steel had made possible the very shape of modern America, yet he died without enough money to pay for his own funeral. The decline was so complete that even the mountains of Loretto, where his extraordinary journey had begun, seemed to cast longer shadows over his memory. Yet as the 1940s dawned and America stood on the brink of another great transformation, questions remained about the true nature of Charles Schwab's legacy. In the spring of 1946, as America emerged triumphant from World War II, Emma Urania Dinky Schwab died in relative obscurity, closing the final chapter of the Schwab dynasty. She had outlived her husband by 7 years, inhabiting a world that had forgotten the days when the Schwab name opened every door in New York. Their marriage, childless through the decades, left no direct heir to carry forward either the family name or its legacy. The final accounting of the Schwab estate stood as stark testimony to the completeness of the dynasty's collapse. Creditors picked through the remaining assets like scavengers after a storm, finding little of value that hadn't already been claimed. Even personal items, once treasured for their memories rather than their worth, went to auction. The man who had built billion-dollar corporations left behind a legacy of debt and disappointment. Bethlehem Steel survived its founder's passing, but never recaptured its former glory. Through the latter half of the 20th century, the company that had once revolutionized American construction gradually faded, finally surrendering to bankruptcy in 2001. The furnaces that had forged the steel for America's greatest buildings fell silent in 2003, marking the end of an industrial era that Schwab himself had helped create. In Loretto, where the Schwab story began, preservation of his memory fell to historical societies rather than descendants. The grounds of Immergrün, once manicured to rival European palaces, slowly surrendered to nature's advance. Modern-day members of the extended Schwab family live unremarkable lives, their connection to the steel titan existing primarily in genealogical records and family stories. Yet Schwab's influence persists in unexpected ways. The educational institutions he supported continue their missions, perhaps his most sustainable legacy. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, transformed its industrial ruins into symbols of renewal, proving that even in decline, Schwab's vision could inspire innovation. The steel-framed skyscrapers he helped make possible still pierce the clouds above American cities, silent monuments to his technical genius. Time has rendered a complex verdict on Charles Schwab's legacy. Modern observers see in his story cautionary lessons about hubris and the ephemeral nature of wealth. His management innovations, the emphasis on worker welfare and the belief in positive reinforcement, have become standard practice in modern industry. The very volatility of his fortune offers warnings to contemporary titans of industry who might believe their own success unassailable. In the end, the most profound aspect of Schwab's legacy may lie not in what he built or lost, but in what his story reveals about the American experience itself. Here was a man who embodied both the promise and peril of the American dream, the rapid rise from poverty to unimaginable wealth, the innovative spirit that transformed an industry, and the hubris that eventually brought it all crashing down. The steel that bore his company's name still stands in bridges and buildings across America, even as the fortune that built them vanished like morning fog. Perhaps that is Charles Schwab's true legacy. Not the millions made and lost, but the physical transformation of America itself. A transformation that, for better or worse, helped shape the nation we inhabit today. Peering through an oppressive cloak of fog during the somber twilight hours of New York City in the year 1947, there looms an imposing spectre, the decaying Vanderbilt Triple Palace. Once a shining beacon of grandeur and prosperity, it now echoes with the hushed whispers of a forgotten splendor. In its heyday, the palace glistened like a diamond under the opulent glow of gaslit chandeliers. Rooms were decked with European art, while gilded mirrors reflected the refined tastes of the era's elite. The echoes of laughter, clinking crystal, and impassioned debates filled the grand halls, all bearing testimony to the meteoric rise of the Vanderbilt dynasty. However, the current visage of the Triple Palace was an unnerving contrast. Its decadent opulence had faded, traded for an ominous air of dereliction. The silent corridors now reeked of neglect and abandonment. The imposing structure that epitomized luxury now bore the scars of time and indifference, a granite edifice teetering on the brink of oblivion. Pondering such a heart-wrenching image, one might ask, how did this majestic empire collapse, surrendering its palatial grandeur to time's merciless grasp? Join us on this intriguing journey to answer your query as we embark on an expedition to once and for all explain how the Vanderbilt family went from old money to no money. The dawn of the 19th century unveiled a new titan in the American commercial narrative, a man by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt, affectionately known as the Commodore. His tale opens in the rugged setting of Staten Island, New York, in 1794. Birthed forth in a lineage of 9, young Cornelius was cast in the forge of humility, born into an environment of limited means. Looking back through history, the seeds of the Vanderbilt legacy can be traced to De Bilt, nestled in the heart of Utrecht, Netherlands. Here, Jan Uertzen, Cornelius's great-great-great-grandfather, and a humble Dutch farmer, sought a new life in New Amsterdam, the city that would eventually bear the name New York. In an amazing twist of fate, this ancestor of one of America's wealthiest dynasties came to the New World not only penniless, but was forced into indentured servitude upon his arrival in 1650. However, his backbreaking work would turn out to be the sacrifice that set the Vanderbilt legacy in motion. His village name, suffixed by the Dutch Vander, translated to "of the built," eventually morphed over generations into the weighty name of Vanderbilt. Now, the inception of Cornelius's empire was marked at the tender age of 16, as he gambled on a ferry service operation between Staten Island and Manhattan, funded by a loan of $100 from his mother. This modest venture bloomed into a colossal fortune exceeding $100 million, a staggering sum that today's standards would value over $200 billion. Cornelius Vanderbilt, a figure cast in the mold of determination and intelligence, etched his path to prosperity through an inexhaustible work ethic and shrewd business maneuvering. His simple ferry service expanded its reach during the tumultuous times of the War of 1812, serving the far-flung government outposts strewn around New York City. As peace was restored, Vanderbilt shifted his sights to the steamship industry, aligning himself with the strategic acumen of Thomas Gibbons. Possessing an innate radar for identifying opportunities within fledgling markets, Vanderbilt seized control of the steamboat and nascent railroad industries, effectively transforming the American landscape. In particular, his strategic mastery lay in his ability to grow markets, outmaneuvering competition through offering accessible prices and exploring untapped territories. He built his businesses on the burgeoning pillars of customer satisfaction, efficiency, frugality, and uncompromising consequences for dishonesty or idleness. And even better, this agile titan was no stranger to industry evolution. His adaptability became evident when he smoothly transitioned from steamboats to railroads. Not merely content with business savvy, Vanderbilt was also a ruthless competitor, infamous for his aggressive tactics in obliterating competition. And with regard to his temperament, as a man of few words, Vanderbilt was esteemed for his impeccable judgment of character. He often remained stoic in the face of criticism, steadfast in his decisions, his unyielding determination and adaptability. This drive allowed him to amass a formidable fortune, crowning him as one of the wealthiest Americans of the 19th century. In fact, his lifestyle could be described as having an even Spartan-like frugality, a trait inherited from his mother. This very deliberate lifestyle choice marked him as an outlier, creating a tangible rift between himself and the glittering upper echelons of high society. Yet, unbeknownst to the Commodore, a dramatic shift loomed on the horizon. His descendants, heirs to the Vanderbilt fortune, would cast away their patriarch's doctrine of frugality. They instead embraced a life dripping with extravagance and opulence, casting aside the lessons of their forebear and eventually, as the kids today would say, fumbling the bag. You see, their actions would signal a stark departure from Cornelius's principles, setting the stage for a story of epic downfall and squandered wealth. A tale as grand as their inheritance, filled with missteps, excesses, and lavish spending that would threaten the very existence of the Vanderbilt fortune. With the arsenal of family lineage and robust wealth at their disposal, one could imagine the Vanderbilts flourishing as an enduring emblem of American old money. Yet, in an unexpected twist of fate, Cornelius Vanderbilt's descendants took a nosedive into the realms of opulence and luxurious excess. The precursor to this ill-fated journey was William Henry Vanderbilt, Cornelius's son. Despite his pedigree, he failed to instill the old money ethos into his 8 offspring, arguably raising several who were, alas, spoiled brats beyond measure. In his personal life, William managed to amass an estate worth $200 million by the time of his demise in 1885, doubling his father's empire. However, whispers of his volatile temperament and emotional inconsistency cast a shadow over his accomplishments, and likely hint at how he would come to raise a generation of intemperate progeny. Early anecdotes recount tales reminiscent of HBO's Succession, portraying the relationship between William and his father, Cornelius, akin to that of Logan Roy and Kendall Roy. Cornelius, often frustrated with his eldest son, called him a blockhead and blatherskite. William yearned to prove otherwise, but lacked the courage to face the Commodore's censure. However, a turning point arrived during a family voyage to Europe aboard the steamship Vanderbilt in 1860. Following this trip, father and son grew closer, and William assumed an increasingly integral role in the Vanderbilt business empire. Yet, once at the helm, William's unpredictable nature became a public nuisance. One incident in particular occurred in 1883, when journalist John Dickinson Sherman questioned him about his operation of the limited express train service. One incident in particular occurred in 1883. To a question about whether the trains were run for public convenience, William retorted, "The public be damned." This outburst reflected the growing detachment of the Vanderbilt lineage from the principles of their patriarch. Upon the demise of William Henry Vanderbilt, the family's financial leviathan passed into the hands of his sons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II and William Kissam Vanderbilt. This heralded a new era in the dynasty's narrative, one marked by an increasingly convoluted distribution of wealth. The vast Vanderbilt fortune, once a concentrated reservoir of wealth, began to spread thin across an ever-growing family tree. With each passing generation, the inheritance split among a growing number of descendants. As family branches multiplied, the division of assets exacerbated, gradually diluting the individual shares of the once enormous family wealth. Simultaneously, the formidable grasp of inheritance taxes began to gnaw at the edges of the family's fortune. As one generation passed and handed down their wealth to the next, each transfer was met with sizable tax implications. Over time, these seemingly harmless nibbles transformed into significant bites out of the family coffers. The shadow of such financial burdens grew longer with each subsequent generation, steadily eroding the formidable Vanderbilt fortune. Worse still, the family was plagued by a series of reckless financial choices. Much of the Vanderbilt progeny, far removed from the industrious ethos of their forebear, failed to demonstrate the same business acumen and financial prudence that Cornelius Vanderbilt had once embodied. High-risk ventures, failed investments, and a lack of interest in nurturing the family's business interests dealt a series of devastating blows to their wealth. Compounding this was their inclination towards a luxurious lifestyle. Unlike the Commodore, the descendants reveled in extravagance and opulence. They spent prodigiously, indulging in grand mansions, ostentatious parties, and lavish art collections. Such unrestrained spending only served to accelerate the decline of the once mighty Vanderbilt fortune. This combination of expanding family size, punishing inheritance taxes, imprudent financial decisions, and unabated spending cast a foreboding shadow over the Vanderbilt dynasty. The fortune, once a titan in the annals of American wealth, gradually began its descent into oblivion. By the mid-20th century, the Vanderbilt star had considerably dimmed in the American public sphere, as evidenced by the fate of their grand Fifth Avenue mansions, many of which were sold, demolished, or repurposed as museums. A mere 30 years post Cornelius Vanderbilt's death, not a single Vanderbilt was listed among the wealthiest Americans. Tragically, within half a century of the Commodore's passing, the vast Vanderbilt fortune had entirely evaporated. Now, let us delve deeper into the distinctive factors that precipitated the decline of the Vanderbilt wealth and juxtapose it with a family that, despite amassing wealth during the same era, managed to sustain it through generations. To understand the contrasts, let's first consider a hypothetical scenario. Imagine a dominant figure at the helm of a multi-billion-dollar family empire suddenly succumbing to illness. The CEO, who doesn't belong to the family, has handpicked a COO as his successor. Yet the board remains divided in its support. The company's financial health is waning, prompting board anxieties. Without the board's unanimous backing, exploring alternative CEO candidates becomes imperative. Further convoluting matters is the greenhorn board chair, a family member with another family member and controlling shareholder expecting this chair to ascend as the next CEO. This scenario may seem unusual, but in the world of family-owned businesses, finding a successor is a complex labyrinth. The Vanderbilt family's story mirrors this scenario. The dispersion of their fortune during the third generation corresponded with diminishing family interest in their key asset, the New York Central, coupled with escalating expenses. The Vanderbilts were known for their philanthropy, especially William Kissam Vanderbilt of the third generation, who donated millions to numerous causes. Yet, the dawn of income and estate taxes and the family's incessant spending hastened their wealth's decline. During the initial stages of their wealth accumulation, there was a minimal business regulatory framework, allowing them a free hand in dominating entire industries. The era they thrived in was marked by an absence of income and estate taxes, which meant that the Vanderbilts were able to amass an unimaginable fortune free of governmental restrictions or financial drains. However, as societal norms and governmental policies evolved, the Vanderbilts found themselves facing new challenges. This era also saw an increased regulatory focus on monopolies and business practices, adding another layer of complexity to maintaining and growing their fortune. Further exacerbating this situation was the Great Depression, which wreaked havoc on the American economy. It affected the Vanderbilts' investments and economic interests, leading to a significant downturn in their fortunes. The Rockefeller family, conversely, employed shrewd strategies to safeguard their wealth. John D. Rockefeller's business, via generation-skipping trusts, ensured wealth propagation through the generations. A generation-skipping trust allows the transfer of substantial amounts of money tax-free, skipping a generation, usually passing from the grantor to the grandchildren, rather than the children. In the Rockefellers' case, they managed to retain and multiply their wealth by channeling it down to more distant generations, rather than distributing it among immediate successors. Now, if you'd like to hear more specifics about the Rockefeller family's rags to riches story, be sure to click the video on the right-hand corner of the screen, or visit the video description box below to hear our deep dive on that dynasty's fascinating tale. The Vanderbilts, however, after a few generations, lacked an established core business that could continuously feed wealth into their trust. Their approach primarily involved the passing of assets directly from parent to child in each generation. This strategy not only exposed their wealth to the successive imposition of estate taxes with each generational transfer, but also made their fortune vulnerable to the lavish spending habits of each inheritor. The Rockefellers, by structuring their wealth transfer through a generation-skipping trust, managed to avoid these pitfalls and ensure the long-term preservation of their family's wealth. And what else set the Rockefellers apart? David Rockefeller Jr., chairman of Rockefeller and Company, in a rare interview, spoke of a system of values, traditions, and institutions developed by the family. These mechanisms aided the family in staying united and preserving their wealth, serving as practical tools for any family trying to instill sound monetary values in their children. Remarkably, the Rockefeller family largely remained unified, devoid of public scandals, feuds, lawsuits, or tragedies that typically plague wealthy dynasties. Today, over 250 direct descendants of John D. Rockefeller and Laura Spelman Rockefeller form the family. We meet as a family twice a year, often more than 100 of us in a room for a Christmas lunch, for example, said David Rockefeller. From the age of 21, family members are invited to these gatherings, aptly called the Family Forum. Here they discuss the family's direction, new members, career news, and other significant milestones. They ensure everyone feels part of the family, including those who married into it. Preserving the family history is also deemed essential. The Rockefellers do this through their familial homesteads, places passed down over generations, where they can reconnect with their past. I can go back to the place where my great-grandfather lived over 100 years ago and see how he lived and see how his son and their grandchildren lived, added David Rockefeller. Such practices exemplify the different approaches two similarly wealthy families took to wealth preservation. The Vanderbilt legacy today is a fascinating tale of resilience, adaptation, and lessons learned from the rise and fall of one of America's wealthiest families. Despite the family's difficulties and the decline of their once vast fortune, some members of the Vanderbilt family have managed to create their own paths and leave lasting impressions on society. Gloria Vanderbilt, a descendant of the Vanderbilt family, faced a difficult life marked by personal tragedies and challenges. Born in 1924, she was the daughter of Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt and Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt. At a young age, Gloria was thrust into the spotlight during a highly publicized custody battle between her mother and her paternal aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Despite these early hardships, Gloria went on to become a highly respected and successful artist, fashion designer, and author. Her resilience and determination to forge her own path endeared her to the public and made her a beloved figure. Throughout her life, Gloria Vanderbilt was not only a colorful but also a very successful personality who made many contributions to the society in which she lived and thrived. She was an exceptional, vivacious fashion icon, renowned for her distinctive style and the widely successful Vanderbilt's brand. In a fascinating aside, one of our followers at Old Money Luxury shared a personal interaction with Gloria Vanderbilt, recalling, "I met Gloria Vanderbilt at her New York art show in 2003. She was elegant, well-bred, polite, soft-spoken, and greeted me with a big smile on her face. Her hair, makeup, clothes were impeccable and understated. Her teeth and complexion were perfect. I'm so glad I met her. I've read her books. She lived appropriately. She was an iconic figure who needed protection from devious people." At her level of wealth, she had friendships with designers, actors, singers, lawyers, professors, business people with education and talent. She loved her sons deeply. Gloria's sons, Anderson Cooper and Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, also faced their share of challenges growing up as Vanderbilt descendants. Anderson Cooper, a well-known journalist and television personality, has spoken openly about the impact of his family's history on his life and career. He has expressed gratitude for the opportunities his family's legacy has afforded him, while also acknowledging the importance of hard work and self-reliance. Tragically, Carter Vanderbilt Cooper passed by his own hand at the age of 23, a devastating loss for the family. The current financial situation of the Vanderbilt descendants varies, as the once enormous family fortune has been significantly diminished over the years. Many of the family's descendants have pursued careers in various fields, from journalism to fashion, and have built their own wealth and success independent of the family's legacy. The family's remaining assets and lingering influence can still be seen in the form of their historic mansions, such as the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, and the Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island. These properties serve as reminders of the family's immense wealth and influence during the Gilded Age, and continue to attract visitors from around the world. The rise and fall of the Vanderbilts offers valuable lessons for future generations. The importance of responsible wealth management, strategic estate planning, and the potential pitfalls of excessive spending and poor investment decisions are all evident in the family's story. Additionally, the Vanderbilt legacy serves as a reminder of the importance of resilience and adaptability in the face of adversity. In 1957, $10 million bought you quite a lot in Manhattan, and for one, Huntington Hartford II, it bought exactly 12 months of fun, his annual trust fund allowance flowing as regularly as champagne at his Newport mansion. But even a fortune that could fill 16,000 A&P supermarkets proved insufficient for a man whose spending habits made Gatsby look frugal. And while ordinary Americans counted pennies at his family's checkout counters, Hartford counted castles, collecting properties like children collect baseball cards. Now, all this would have been sustainable, perhaps, if young Huntington had inherited his family's business acumen along with their billions. He hadn't, and therein lies today's tale, of how one man managed to dissolve a fortune as vast as the ocean surrounding his beloved Paradise Island, as we describe the story of Huntington Hartford, the billionaire grocery heir who went broke building a private island. In the glittering world of 1950s Manhattan, $1.5 billion buys rather a lot of groceries, and for Huntington Hartford II, heir to the A&P supermarket empire, it bought nearly everything, except, as we'll discover, common sense. Thus, while ordinary Americans are counting pennies at his family's 16,000 supermarket checkouts, young Hartford is counting houses, yachts, and failed business ventures with the casual disregard of a man who's never heard the word budget. And the trust fund arrangements crafted by his shrewd uncles, John and George Hartford, read like a banker's attempt at creative writing. Young Huntington receives a mere $10 million annually in today's money, a sum that would make modern billionaires wince, while being rather deliberately kept away from any meaningful control of A&P's operations. The generational trust structure, designed to protect both Hartford and the family fortune, proves about as effective as using a paper bag to hold water. Now, about those assets. When we say real estate portfolio, we typically means a modest collection of properties. But Hartford's idea of property collecting makes the Monopoly board look positively minimalist. There's Sea Verge, his Newport pleasure palace, where the champagne flows with more regularity than the tides. His Beekman Place apartment sprawls across 11,000 square feet of Manhattan's most coveted real estate. each room a testament to what happens when unlimited wealth meets unrestricted ambition. The man's yacht isn't just any floating gin palace, it's a converted four-masted schooner that makes modern oligarchs' vessels look positively provincial. His car collection could fill a museum, each classic automobile worth millions in today's market. And speaking of museums, his art collection becomes a rather pointed rebuke to modern art, filled with classical masterpieces that he deems proper art, unlike those frightfully modern abstracts he so famously despises. But it's Paradise Island, formerly the rather unfortunately named Hog Island, that truly showcases Hartford's particular talent for financial self-destruction. Purchased for $10 million in 1962, that's $90 million in today's currency, this Bahamian jewel becomes his obsession. Simultaneously, he pours $17 million into his gallery of modern art in Manhattan, a marble edifice that becomes known as the Lollipop Building, rather fitting for a man whose fortune would eventually dissolve like sugar in rain. The development plans for Paradise Island read like a fever dream. Luxury hotels, a casino that would make Vegas blush, shopping to rival Fifth Avenue, all catering to the world's elite who, presumably, have nothing better to do with their millions. But here's where our tale takes a rather dramatic turn. While Hartford stands on his tropical acquisition, directing construction crews like Caesar surveying Rome, the financial storm clouds are gathering with the subtle intensity of a Caribbean hurricane. What happens when unlimited ambition crashes headlong into financial reality? The answer lies in a cautionary tale of wealth, waste, and wanting rather too much of everything. A modest storefront on Vesey Street in New York, 1859, marked the beginning of what would grow into America's first retail empire, thanks to George Huntington Hartford and George Gilman. The Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company started as a straightforward venture, importing tea directly from China to eliminate middlemen and provide consumers with better prices. Yet, the elder Hartford had something even more precious than tea, an almost supernatural ability to grasp the desires and needs of ordinary Americans. This simple beginning transformed into an unprecedented retail revolution under the leadership of his sons, John and George Jr. Hartford. The brothers didn't just expand their father's vision, they revolutionized it. By 1912, they had created the economy store concept, slashing prices by eliminating credit and delivery services. In 1915, they launched the cash and carry model, and by 1925, they had pioneered the modern supermarket format. A&P stores multiplied across America like cells dividing, from 200 stores in 1900 to an astonishing 16,000 by 1930, generating annual sales equivalent to billions in today's currency. The family's influence extended far beyond retail. They created their own manufacturing facilities, developed private label brands, and established a vertically integrated supply chain that would become a blueprint for modern retail operations. The Hartford name became synonymous with American business success, their wealth rivaling that of the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. Into this world of unprecedented prosperity stepped young Huntington Hartford II, born to a complex heritage that would shape his destiny. His mother, Henrietta Gerard DuPont, descended from Southern aristocracy, her family's roots stretching back to colonial Charleston. Her extensive European travels and deep appreciation for Old World culture profoundly influenced her son's upbringing. She insisted on the finest education, the right social connections, and an appreciation for art and culture that would later fuel Hartford's ambitious cultural projects. His father, George Huntington Hartford Jr., while part of the A&P empire, carved his own path through innovation, securing numerous patents that added significantly to the family fortune. But it was Henrietta who orchestrated young Huntington's social education with military precision, pushing him into America's most elite circles, where old money reigned supreme and new money, even A&P money, was viewed with barely disguised contempt. At St. Paul's School, among the sons of America's oldest families, Hartford faced daily reminders of his outsider status. Despite his family's vast wealth, he remained the grocery boy to his peers, a designation that cut deep and fostered insecurities that would later manifest in his desperate pursuit of social acceptance and cultural legitimacy. When the time came for Hartford to take his place in the family business, his uncles designed what appeared to be a perfect entry plan. He would start in the advertising department, learning the business from the ground up. But the arrangement proved disastrous. Within months, his unconventional ideas and resistance to authority led to his dismissal, marking the beginning of a pattern that would define his career. Ambitious dreams, followed by spectacular failures. Hartford's drive to step away from the family's established empire for ever riskier pursuits was fueled by a deep-seated ambition shaped in the halls of elite society. Those formative years crafted a man who would ultimately risk and lose one of America's greatest fortunes. In 1964, while New York's art establishment celebrated the raw splashes of abstract expressionism, Huntington Hartford stood in his newly completed gallery of modern art, surrounded by classical masterpieces that cost him the equivalent of $33 million in today's currency. The gleaming white building, dubbed the Lollipop Building by its critics, rose like a marble rebuke to modernism on Columbus Circle. Hartford's vision didn't stop at Manhattan. In the sun-drenched hills above Los Angeles, he established an artist colony where painters could pursue what he deemed real art, far from the corrupting influence of contemporary trends. The California venture proved merely one facet of Hartford's West Coast empire building. His Hollywood mansion became a rotating stage for America's celebrity elite, where one might find Elizabeth Taylor lounging by the pool while Frank Sinatra entertained at the piano. The parties grew legendary, crystalline fountains flowing with champagne, orchestras playing until dawn, and Hartford himself moving through the crowds with a different starlet on his arm each month. Yet even as he played host to Hollywood, Hartford's business ambitions led him into increasingly precarious ventures. The founding of Tosco Corporation in 1955 marked his boldest gamble yet, an experimental oil shale extraction project in Colorado that consumed millions. The technology promised to revolutionize American energy production. Instead, it merely proved that even A&P money could burn as quickly as the shale they processed. His personal life mirrored the volatility of his investments. 4 marriages, each more lavish than the last, punctuated by highly publicized affairs with actresses and socialites, earned him the tabloid nickname Hunt the Playboy. His mother, Henrietta, watched each romantic misadventure with mounting horror. From her Park Avenue apartment, she dispatched a steady stream of letters and emissaries, attempting to guide her son toward more suitable matches. When he announced his engagement to a 23-year-old actress, Hartford being 47 at the time, Henrietta's intervention proved so fierce that the young woman fled to Europe. But it was Paradise Island that truly showcased Hartford's talent for magnificent miscalculation. By 1968, the development had swallowed over $28 million, which, adjusted for inflation, approached $250 million in today's dollars. The Ocean Club rose from the Caribbean shores, its marble floors imported from Italy, its chandeliers from France. Hartford envisioned a casino that would outshine Monte Carlo, hiring architects who had designed for European royalty. Yet the crucial gambling license remained elusive, caught in a web of local politics and international intrigue. As construction costs mounted, Hartford's financial advisors began sending increasingly urgent messages. The A&P fortune, vast as it seemed, was not limitless. But Hartford, standing on his private beach, watching another sunset paint the sky in colors that even his collected masters couldn't capture, remained convinced that Paradise Island would prove his crowning achievement. The next phone call from his accountants could wait until tomorrow. By 1970, the shimmering dream of Paradise Island had become a nightmare of uncollected debts and broken ambitions. Huntington Hartford stood on the powder-white beaches he had intended to rival the French Riviera, watching as his vision slowly unraveled. The Ocean Club, that marble monument to excess, had swallowed over 28 million US dollars, the equivalent of nearly $250 million in today's currency. Yet the crucial gambling license remained elusive, caught in a web of Bahamian politics and international intrigue. Creditors, once dazzled by his aristocratic flair, now eyed Hartford with barely concealed suspicion. The A&P fortune, so vast and unassailable, proved no match for his insatiable appetite for grand projects. As construction costs escalated and revenues failed to materialize, his financial advisors issued increasingly dire warnings. But for Hartford, standing in the sunset's glow, the next phone call could always wait until tomorrow. This pattern of magnificent delusion would come to define the final chapter of his empire. A failed automated parking garage in Manhattan, a modeling agency that bled money, and a series of other ill-conceived ventures each took their toll, draining resources that could have shored up his crumbling island dream. The lawsuits piled up, with creditors pursuing him for unpaid bills and defaulted loans. Even his art collection, once a point of pride, became a liability to be slowly liquidated. As his wealth diminished, Hartford retreated from the social circles that had once celebrated him. The dinner party invitations dried up, replaced by collections agents and lukewarm obituaries predicting the demise of a once great dynasty. The man who had once been feted by Hollywood's elite now found himself isolated, both emotionally and financially. In his final years, Hartford made desperate attempts to salvage what remained of his legacy. He poured the last of his resources into an ill-fated resort development in the Bahamas, hoping to recapture the magic of Paradise Island. But the project, like so many before it, collapsed under the weight of his ambition and the reality of his dwindling funds. By the time of his death in 1979, the Hartford name, once synonymous with American business success, had become a cautionary tale of hubris and financial ruin. The downfall of Huntington Hartford had become a cautionary tale that echoed through the corridors of high society. Where once his name had been synonymous with American prosperity, it now served as a sobering lesson in the perils of mismanaging inherited wealth. The shift in public perception, from admiring his lavish displays of opulence to pitying his spectacular financial ruin, underscored the fragility of fortunes built on the backs of others. In the years following Hartford's death in 1979, the family legacy began to fade from the limelight. The Hartford name, once a beacon in the annals of American business, gradually receded from the social scene as the descendants struggled to rehabilitate their tarnished reputation. The cautionary tale of Huntington Hartford had become seared into the collective consciousness of the wealthy elite, a vivid example of how unchecked ambition and a lack of financial prudence could unravel even the mightiest of dynasties. Yet, amid the ruins of his empire, a few of Hartford's cultural contributions managed to endure. The art collection he had so zealously amassed, a symbol of his refined tastes and deep pockets, found new homes in museums across the country. And though the Paradise Island resort he had envisioned as his crowning achievement had crumbled under the weight of his financial overreach, the location itself would eventually be redeveloped into a thriving vacation destination, its legacy outliving the man who had once dreamed of transforming it into a Caribbean Xanadu. In many ways, Huntington Hartford's life story could be seen as a reverse Horatio Alger tale, a man who had inherited untold riches only to squander them through a combination of grandiose schemes and personal indulgence. His legacy served as a sobering reminder that wealth, no matter how substantial, is not a guarantee of success or happiness. For future generations of heirs and heiresses, the cautionary tale of the Hartford fortune's demise would become a guiding light, shaping their approach to financial management and tempering their own ambitions. In a grand study awash with flickering shadows, Andrew Carnegie sits at a dark mahogany desk. The room is nearly dark, save for the small circle of light cast by an ornate oil lamp. The year is 1889, and outside the window the Pittsburgh steel mills are ablaze, lighting up the night sky like the stars glimmering above the Scotsman's palatial estate. However, inside, a different kind of inferno burns. It is the fire of an idea that will change the course of American history. With a clenched jaw and eyes gleaming with resolve, Carnegie leans forward, gripping his quill as if it were a sword. As he scribbles intently, he hesitates suddenly, feeling the weight of the next sentence. After taking in a deep, reflective breath, the magnate finally writes his declaration for the ages. The man who dies rich dies disgraced. Relieved, Carnegie puts down his pen, contemplating the magnitude of the words he has just committed to paper. It is indeed a declaration that will reverberate through generations, shaking the foundations of American capitalism. Now, in our 21st century economic climate, the concept of old money signifies not just wealth, but the enduring legacy of families who have maintained and even greatly expanded their fortunes for generations. But what happens when a family intentionally breaks this cycle of generational wealth and gives away their billions on purpose, thus consciously pushing their status back down to the middle class? In this episode of Old Money Luxury, we will explore this exact enigma. Guided by the ideology of their patriarch, Andrew Carnegie, the Carnegie family went from amassing a colossal fortune that, for a time, crowned him the world's richest man, to strategically giving away more than $5.6 billion in today's currency. With that mystifying prelude as a backdrop, join us as we now recount the entire saga and describe how the Carnegies went from old money to no money. Our journey first begins on the misty lanes of Dunfermline, Scotland, where Andrew Carnegie first saw the light of day in 1835. Born to no ordinary family, young Andrew's lineage was steeped in the humble craft of weaving, a tradition nourished by his father, William Carnegie, and his paternal grandfather. The maternal side of his family tree branched off in a different direction. Andrew's mother, Margaret Morrison Carnegie, hailed from a line deeply involved in tanning and shoemaking. However, she was not merely a homemaker, but rather the daughter of George Lauder, a political stalwart who ensured young Andrew's mind was sparked by the heroics of Scottish legends like Robert the Bruce, Rob Roy, and William Wallace. The Carnegie family's daily life was framed by the quaintness of their weaver's cottage and the looming presence of the Industrial Revolution, a transformative period that remodeled Scotland's social fabric and economic vitality. Dunfermline itself was a hub of textile manufacturing, but the family's fortunes dimmed as factory systems replaced traditional handlooms. This decline subjected weavers like William Carnegie to financial hardships, casting shadows of poverty over their lives. Yet, William was not just a weaver caught in the crossfire of industrialization. He was a passionate advocate of the Chartist movement, which called for broad political and social reforms. On the other side, Margaret Morrison Carnegie's family was also politically active, adding another layer to Andrew's inherent views on social responsibility. But how did the teenaged Andrew navigate through a world shifting under his feet? The answer lies in his relentless pursuit of self-education. Formal schooling took a back seat as Andrew leaned into books and night school, supported by a family tradition that valued intellectual rigor and political activism. Libraries became his sanctuaries, thanks to Uncle George's introductions to literary masterpieces and historical narratives. These early experiences seeded his lifelong love for libraries and a philanthropic fervor to construct these reservoirs of knowledge across English-speaking countries. But Scotland's Industrial Revolution would soon not just alter the nation's economy, it would birth complex societal structures, trigger urban migration, and lead to governmental reforms. Amidst this tumult, it became clear that the Carnegie family needed to seek greener pastures. And to that, the burgeoning magnetic allure of the American dream, the notion that in the United States you can make it big through sheer grit and enterprise. And we arrive at the year 1848, when the Carnegies decide to pack up their hopes and dreams, cross the Atlantic, and settle in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania. Here, they would hope to find not just economic sustenance, but a stage upon which young Andrew could shape his indomitable destiny. Now, the Carnegie family had deliberately chosen Allegheny, the budding industrial suburb of Pittsburgh, for its abundant economic prospects. During this period, in the mid-19th century, America was a crucible of change, fueled by manifest destiny and the California gold rush of 1849. The nation itself was also on the cusp of an industrial revolution, transitioning from agricultural simplicity to industrial complexity. Allegheny specifically was a mosaic of diverse communities, including Germans and Croats, and offered a plethora of job opportunities in sectors like commercial trading, meatpacking, and leather tanning. However, despite these favorable conditions, the Carnegies faced initial hardships. William Carnegie's weaving business faltered, forcing 13-year-old Andrew into the laborious role of a bobbin boy in a cotton mill, where he would work 72-hour weeks for a modest $1.20 per hour, roughly $168 a month in today's currency. But not one to be confined by menial tasks, Andrew navigated through a series of roles that laid the foundation for his later empire. Positions such as messenger, secretary, and telegraph operator for the Pennsylvania Railroad served as an informal education in corporate structure and strategy. His affiliation with the railroad industry was particularly instructive. It offered lessons in management and cost optimization, as well as invaluable connections with industry giants like Thomas A. Scott and J. Edgar Thompson. These associations helped Carnegie secure early ventures like the Keystone Bridge Company, critical to the railway infrastructure. Subsequently, the Civil War amplified Carnegie's already diversifying portfolio, especially with his stake in the Columbia Oil Company. The conflict skyrocketed demand for both iron and oil, boosting his profits. Although eligible for military service, he opted to pay a substitute $850, or roughly 20,000 modern dollars, to enlist in his stead, a common practice among the affluent. And by the early 1870s, Carnegie had diversified his investments across a broad spectrum. His real breakthrough came in 1873 with the recognition of steel's untapped potential. Notably, he initiated the construction of the Edgar Thompson Works in Braddock, Pennsylvania, a groundbreaking facility introducing the Bessemer steelmaking process to America. Costing an estimated $1.2 million, or roughly $30 million in modern currency, the mill was a high-stakes bet on an unproven sector. Yet the gamble yielded significant dividends, as the facility didn't just elevate steel production standards, it fundamentally altered the fabric of American industry. In the years following, Carnegie further expanded and integrated his business holdings, including significant assets like the Scotia ore mines, Union iron mills, and Lucy furnaces. This methodical combination of resources and production capacities set the stage for the emergence of the powerhouse that became Carnegie Steel Company in 1889. Now, by the dawn of the 1890s, Andrew Carnegie was firmly established as an industrial colossus, presiding over a domain that extended well beyond the furnaces of his steel operations. His Carnegie Steel Company was the bedrock of global steel production, redefining benchmarks for both efficiency and profit. During his financial peak, Carnegie was an indomitable force in American enterprise, amassing his immense wealth chiefly through steel production endeavors. His holdings were extensive, comprising a diverse array of investments from lucrative real estate to varied business ventures. One significant acquisition was Scotland's Skibo Castle in 1899, which he transformed into a tranquil retreat, far from the industrial hustle. You see, Carnegie's monumental success was rooted in two pillars: innovative techniques and shrewd business acumen. His playbook included various methods aimed at ensuring Carnegie Steel remained an industry leader. Vertical integration, strategic mergers, and an uncompromising attention to cost efficiency were among them. For example, vertical integration was foundational to his business approach. He took ownership of entities along different stages of the steel-making process, from iron ore mines to railway companies. This end-to-end control enabled him to dramatically lower production costs while simultaneously optimizing operations for greater efficiency. His expansionary ambitions were further realized through mergers and acquisitions, notably the union of assets with H.C. Frick and Company in 1892. This move fortified the Carnegie Steel Company, giving him greater leverage over both the marketplace and the supply chain. An unwavering dedication to operational efficiency led him to adopt the Bessemer process, significantly quickening steel production while driving down costs. This made steel more affordable and accessible, altering the American landscape by facilitating the construction of bridges, skyscrapers, and expansive railway systems. However, this zeal for efficiency occasionally came at the cost of labor welfare. The introduction of cutting-edge technology and methods often preceded adequate safety measures. This tension came to a head in the Homestead Strike of 1892, a violent skirmish between workers and management that resulted in 12 deaths and created an enduring fissure between labor and leadership. Henry Clay Frick, who was the muscle of Carnegie Steel at the time, instigated the conflict through wage reductions. While Carnegie was geographically removed, quietly waiting back in Scotland, he had empowered Frick to act unilaterally, leading to a violent standoff that left an indelible scar on his otherwise storied legacy. Indeed, this harrowing incident triggered a significant self-reckoning for Carnegie, ultimately inspiring his gospel of wealth philosophy. This ideological shift diverged markedly from his peers' prevailing perspectives, emphasizing not just the ownership, but also the ethical stewardship of wealth. Published initially in 1889, the thesis proposed that affluence carried a moral duty to benefit society at large. Transitioning from theory to action, Carnegie would subsequently channel his resources into philanthropy, laying the groundwork for educational institutions, public libraries, and other community-focused entities. However, his philanthropic masterstroke would first need an exit strategy from the rough-and-tumble business world of industrial-age America, and therefore he would need a powerful ally to help strategically guide him out of the corridors of ruthless Gilded Age finance. Now, at the turn of the 20th century, when the American steel industry was the backbone of a rapidly modernizing economy, legendary financier and Machiavellian businessman J.P. Morgan saw an unparalleled opportunity. Steel was not just a commodity, it was the lifeblood of industrializing cities, the burgeoning auto industry, and wartime production during World War I. By acquiring Carnegie Steel, Morgan could craft the United States Steel Corporation in his image, a monolithic entity that at the time was the world's largest company. This acquisition enabled Morgan to corner the steel market and exploit the soaring demand for this vital resource. Thus, the 1901 sale of Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan for an astonishing $480 million, equivalent to over $13 billion in today's money, was more than just a business transaction. It provided Andrew Carnegie with the financial muscle to massively escalate his philanthropic activities, in sync with his own moral guidelines encapsulated in his Gospel of Wealth. With this philosophy as his North Star, and seemingly endless cash in the bank after the sale of his empire, Carnegie proclaimed that the affluent were morally obligated to disperse their wealth in their lifetime, and this sale armed him with the capital to make a transformative societal impact. Carnegie's subsequent largesse left an indelible mark on multiple sectors: education, peace initiatives, and scientific research, to name a few. Among his most enduring contributions were the Carnegie Libraries, a global network of more than 2,500 public libraries. Indeed, his advocacy for public libraries came at an opportune moment when the American public library system was in its nascent stage, meeting the growing need for accessible knowledge. Consequently, these libraries were a catalyst for education and self-improvement across diverse populations, and they ushered in a new era of knowledge democratization. Local communities soon became the financial pillars of these libraries, providing about 80% of public funding. Furthermore, Carnegie's focus on libraries spurred a ripple effect, inspiring other local philanthropists to invest in their communities. These libraries were not just buildings filled with books. They were innovation hubs that enriched their localities and continue to serve their communities today. Beyond libraries, Carnegie's financial legacy led to the founding of educational behemoths like Carnegie Mellon University, an institution renowned for its contributions to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Additionally, Carnegie Hall in New York City stands as an emblem of his patronage in the arts. This iconic concert venue has been a stage for countless musical legends and continues to uphold its reputation as an architectural and cultural jewel. However, the sale of Carnegie Steel also had ramifications for Carnegie's personal fortune. In keeping with his views on wealth dispersion, Carnegie systematically drained nearly all of his family's financial reservoirs. Now, in 1919, Andrew Carnegie's death led to a circumspect distribution of his considerable assets, personal belongings, a financial endowment, and real estate properties, among them a New York City townhouse and a Scottish vacation home. His spouse, Louise Whitfield Carnegie, a New York native, had encountered Andrew at the age of 23, thanks to her father. The two marked in 1887 at an intimate ceremony, subsequent to Louise signing a prenuptial contract that waived any future claim on Andrew's wealth. And Louise, frequently depicted as a person of kindness and moral caliber, had a prominent role in Andrew's altruistic pursuits as a board member of the Carnegie Corporation. Following Andrew's demise, she remained an active participant in the family's philanthropic ventures. Margaret Carnegie Miller, their sole child, inherited a modest trust fund, compelling the family to part with the Manhattan residence due to maintenance expenses. Born and raised in New York City, Margaret wed Roswell Miller Jr. in 1919. They had 4 offspring before their marriage disintegrated in 1953. Margaret served on the board of the Carnegie Corporation from 1934 until 1973 and remained an honorary trustee for life until her passing in 1990. Now, the 13 subsequent descendants of Andrew Carnegie have not accumulated billionaire status, but have thrived within the financial bracket of accomplished middle-class to upper-middle-class professionals. Investments in diverse sectors like real estate and technology have been judiciously managed. Philanthropy, too, is an enduring family hallmark. William Thompson, a great-grandson, exemplifies this, having navigated personal setbacks, such as his mother Louise's polio, to perpetuate the family's charitable legacy. As former chair and honorary president of the Carnegie UK Trust, he oversaw the yearly allocation of £1 million to assorted causes. Admirably, in the 21st century era of intense public scrutiny and a mass media obsession with wealth, the Carnegies have kept impressively low profiles. Thorough internet searches on their lives reveal little. Social media platforms are devoid of family references, to the point where it's unlikely you'll find pictures of, or even the full names of, many living Carnegie family members. Such obscurity is indeed cultivated and cherished by this legendary clan, reflecting their old money ethos that prioritizes discretion over publicity. Where new money types may seek public affirmation through visible philanthropy or social media, the Carnegies exemplify different ethics. They have opted for a near-invisible public persona, contrasting sharply with the transparent lifestyles common among contemporary wealthy individuals. The preservation of privacy has thus become a family trait, and it adds another dimension to an already multifaceted family narrative. Andrew Carnegie was a public figure, but his heirs have largely retreated from the spotlight and the headlines, exemplifying a thoughtful navigation between the twin demands of affluence and social responsibility in today's world. At the height of his power, J. Paul Getty could buy almost anything on earth. His oil empire spanned continents, his art collection rivaled museums, and his Tudor estate boasted 72 rooms filled with priceless treasures. Yet he installed a payphone for guests in his mansion, refusing to pay for their calls. This paradox, astronomical wealth paired with pathological frugality, would define not just Getty's life, but the tragic dynasty he created. While he meticulously accumulated the largest private fortune in history, his family unraveled. Sons succumbed to substance abuse and despair, a grandson lost his ear to kidnappers, and the Getty name became synonymous with gilded misery. Thus, in today's episode, we'll take you through the full story of how the world's wealthiest man built an empire that made him a king, but left him dying alone in a castle full of treasures he could never truly enjoy, as we recount the Getty family curse, how America's oil fortune became Hollywood tragedy. In 1957, J. Paul Getty opened Fortune magazine to find himself crowned the richest man in America. The irony wasn't lost on him. He read this news from his Tudor estate in England, where he'd chosen to live as a virtual exile from the country that had made him wealthy. The massive estate, Sutton Place, built in the 1530s, stood as a testament to both his wealth and his increasing isolation from American society. Getty had built his fortune through a combination of ruthless business acumen and extraordinary timing. During the Depression, when others were selling, he was buying, snapping up oil companies at bargain prices. His father had laid the foundation in the Oklahoma oil fields, but Paul transformed that modest success into an empire that spanned continents. Unlike his contemporaries who inherited vast fortunes, Getty started in the oil fields, learning the business from the ground up. His father, George Getty, had initially resisted Paul's vision for expansion, preferring to keep their operation modest and manageable. But Paul saw something bigger, a future where oil would power not just automobiles, but the entire modern world. Getty's first major triumph came in 1916 when he struck oil in Oklahoma's Tulsa County, turning a $500 investment into his first million at age 24. This early success shaped his business philosophy: careful investment combined with bold action when opportunity arose. He meticulously studied geological reports and industry trends, building his expertise in the oil business from the ground up. His personal life, however, proved more challenging than his business ventures. Married and divorced 5 times, father to 5 sons by 4 different women, Getty increasingly focused on his business dealings and art collecting. His first marriage to Jeanette Demont lasted from 1923 to 1926, setting a pattern of personal relationships that would be repeated throughout his life. The contrast between his business success and personal struggles became increasingly apparent as his wealth grew. While Getty Oil expanded across the globe, securing lucrative rights in Saudi Arabia that would multiply his fortune many times over, his family relationships became increasingly complex. He maintained contact with his children primarily through letters and phone calls from his English estate. From Sutton Place, Getty managed his empire with careful attention to costs that sometimes bordered on frugality. The famous payphone he installed for guests became a symbol of his complex relationship with wealth, a billionaire who believed strongly in watching every dollar. Yet this same man built one of the world's greatest private art collections, though always with an eye for value and investment potential. His art collection represented more than just an assemblage of beautiful objects. It was a legacy he hoped would endure. Each carefully chosen piece reflected both his taste and his business acumen, as he often managed to acquire masterpieces at surprisingly reasonable prices through clever negotiation and timing. But as the 1960s dawned, Getty's empire stood at its apex. His wealth had grown to unprecedented levels, making him the richest private citizen in the world. None could have predicted the dark shadow that would soon engulf his family, turning their vast wealth into a curse that would echo through generations. The price of creating such an empire would be paid not by its architect, but by those who inherited its burden. The story of the Getty sons unfolded against the backdrop of America's post-war boom, when their father's wealth had reached heights that seemed almost mythological. But money, as each would discover, offered no protection against personal demons, and sometimes seemed to attract them instead. George F. Getty II, the eldest son, bore the heaviest expectations. Born in 1924 to J. Paul Getty's first wife, Jeanette Demont, George entered a world already shaped by the weight of the Getty name. Intelligent and hard-working, he served in World War II before joining Getty Oil. Unlike his father's other sons, George embraced the oil business, displaying an aptitude that suggested he might one day take over the empire. The relationship between father and son was complex. J. Paul Getty respected George's business acumen, but maintained the same exacting standards he applied to everyone in his organization. Their correspondence revealed a formal relationship filled with discussions of business matters but little personal warmth. George worked diligently to prove himself worthy of the Getty name, taking on increasing responsibilities within the company. Eugene Paul Getty, later known as John Paul Getty Jr., chose a dramatically different path. Born in 1932 to J. Paul Getty's third wife, Adolphine Helmley, Eugene Paul initially worked for the family business, managing Getty Oil's Italian operations. However, by the 1960s, he had embraced the counterculture movement that was sweeping Europe. Eugene Paul's second marriage to Talitha Pohl in 1966 marked his complete break from the corporate world his father inhabited. Talitha, a model and actress of Dutch extraction, became an icon of 1960s style. Their palazzo in Rome became a gathering place for artists, musicians, and European nobility. The couple embodied a new kind of aristocracy, one that merged old money with bohemian sensibilities. J. Ronald Getty, born in Berlin on the 19th of December 1929, to J. Paul Getty and his fifth wife, Anne Rourke, maintained a lower profile than his brothers. He chose to forge his own path outside the family business, though he remained involved in family matters, particularly during the later crises that would engulf the Getty name. Gordon Peter Getty, born on the 20th of December 1933, also to J. Paul Getty and Anne Rourke, would eventually emerge as perhaps the most successful of the brothers in handling the family wealth. Combining his father's business sense with artistic sensibilities, Gordon studied music while maintaining his business interests. This unusual combination of talents would later serve him well as a trustee of the Getty fortune. But it was the trajectory of George Getty II that would first signal the dark turn in the family's story. Despite his apparent success in business, George struggled with personal demons. In 1951, he married Gloria Gordon, and they had a son together. But by the early 1970s, he was facing mounting pressures, both personal and professional. The end came tragically on the 6th of June 1973, when George died in his Los Angeles home at age 48. Following a fight with his wife, he had locked himself in his bedroom, consumed a combination of alcohol and pills, and suffered a devastating injury with a barbecue fork. After delayed medical attention, he slipped into a coma and died, leaving behind questions that would never be fully answered. The death of George Getty II marked a turning point in the family narrative. Within months, another tragedy would strike, one that would capture international headlines and forever change how the world viewed the Getty name. The kidnapping of J. Paul Getty III, Eugene Paul's teenage son, would transform the family's private struggles into public spectacle, revealing the dark side of inheriting one of the world's greatest fortunes. On the 10th of July 1973, in Rome's Piazza Farnese, John Paul Getty III, the 16-year-old son of Eugene Paul Getty, vanished. The teenager, known for his bohemian lifestyle and long red hair, had been living semi-independently in Rome, frequenting the city's nightclubs and art scenes while his father battled drug addiction in England. Initially, when the kidnapping was reported, few took it seriously. The young Getty had previously joked about staging his own kidnapping to extract money from his notoriously frugal grandfather. Even the Italian police were skeptical, suggesting it might be a hoax orchestrated by a teenager seeking attention or funds. This skepticism would prove to be a devastating miscalculation. 2 days after the disappearance, his mother, Gail Harris, received a ransom demand. "We have kidnapped Paul Getty's grandson," it stated. The kidnappers demanded $17 million for his safe return. What followed would become one of the most notorious kidnapping cases in history, exposing the dark paradox at the heart of the Getty fortune. J. Paul Getty's response from Sutton Place shocked the world. "I have 14 grandchildren," he declared, "and if I pay 1 penny of ransom, I'll have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." Behind this seemingly callous response lay his conviction that paying ransoms only encouraged more kidnappings. He also harbored doubts about the authenticity of the kidnapping, suspecting his grandson's involvement in staging it. The situation created an impossible bind for the boy's parents. His father, Eugene Paul Getty, was still struggling with drug addiction in London and had no access to the kind of money the kidnappers demanded. His mother, Gail Harris, had received virtually no settlement after her divorce from Eugene Paul and was essentially penniless, despite the family name. The Getty fortune, worth billions, sat tantalizingly out of reach while a teenager's life hung in the balance. As weeks turned into months, the kidnappers grew increasingly frustrated. Their ransom demands were met with silence or negotiations for lower amounts. The boy was held in the mountains of Calabria under harsh conditions, moved frequently between hiding places to avoid detection. His captors, later identified as members of the 'Ndrangheta crime syndicate, began to lose patience. Then, In November 1973, an envelope arrived at the offices of Il Messaggero newspaper. Inside was a lock of red hair and a human ear, along with a threat. Reduce the ransom to $3 million, or the next package would contain something worse. Accompanying the gruesome delivery was a letter from the young Getty. "This is Paul's ear. If we don't get some money within 10 days, then the other ear will arrive. In other words, he will arrive in little bits." This grotesque turn finally spurred action. J. Paul Getty agreed to contribute $2.2 million toward the ransom, while John Paul Getty Jr. covered the remainder. After painstaking negotiations, the final ransom was set at $2.8 million. On the 15th of December 1973, 5 months after his abduction, John Paul III was found at an abandoned gas station between Rome and Naples. The physical ordeal was over, but the psychological damage had only begun. The young Getty called his grandfather to thank him for securing his release, but J. Paul Getty refused to come to the phone. This final rejection would haunt the teenager as he struggled to rebuild his life in the aftermath of the kidnapping. The case exposed the paradoxes of vast wealth, a family with billions at their disposal, yet paralyzed by distrust, dysfunction, and the complex dynamics of inherited fortune. The kidnapping of John Paul Getty III would become more than just a sensational crime story. It would serve as a dark parable about wealth, family, and the price of being born into one of the world's most famous fortunes. In the years following the kidnapping, the dark shadow over the Getty family only deepened. The physical and psychological aftermath would shape not only John Paul Getty III's life, but the entire family's trajectory. In 1974, he married Gisela Martine Zacher, who was pregnant with their son, marking a new chapter in his life while still grappling with the trauma of his captivity. J. Paul Getty never saw his grandson after the kidnapping. From his Tudor estate in England, he continued to expand his business empire and art collection, seemingly detached from the family turmoil that surrounded his name. When he died on the 6th of June 1976 at age 83, his net worth stood at $2 billion. His will reflected both his passion for art and his complex relationship with his family. The bulk of his fortune went to the J. Paul Getty Museum Trust. At the time of his death, Getty's oil empire was at its peak. Getty Oil stood as one of America's largest private companies, with interests spanning the globe. The Saudi Arabian concession he had secured in the 1940s had proven to be one of the most lucrative oil deals in history. Yet the patriarch's passing set in motion a series of events that would transform the family fortune. For young John Paul III, the years following the kidnapping were marked by struggle. In 1981, at age 25, a devastating combination of drugs, alcohol and Valium triggered a stroke that left him severely disabled, quadriplegic, nearly blind, and unable to speak. His care would require round-the-clock attention for the rest of his life, with costs running into millions of dollars annually. The 1980s brought significant changes to the Getty fortune. In 1984, after years of complex negotiations, Texaco offered to acquire Getty Oil for $9.9 billion. Gordon Getty, as trustee of the family trust, played a crucial role in orchestrating the sale. While the deal generated tremendous wealth, it also marked the end of the Getty